Hi everybody, it's Matricity. Welcome to my Matrix. Today is Spooky Friday, a little bit late, but still going to post it. We're going to talk about haunted dolls. You know, dolls are kind of creepy and spooky, but we're going to talk about not just any doll, but one specific doll, and it's the most haunted, scariest doll known. And it's called Robert the Doll. And he is located at a museum in Florida in Key West. He's actually located, and you can actually go see him at the Fort East Martello Museum in Key West, Florida. So he's there. Now, a little bit about Robert, and I'll post a picture for you so you can see what he looks like. He's about 110 years old, so he looks kind of worn, and his skin is kind of beat up. But he basically is like a little boy in a sailor suit. And he's also holding a dog, a stuffed dog. But when you look at him, you'll see that he is very old. His skin is very marked up, little picks all over it like he has scars. So that gives him kind of a creepy look. In addition, his nose has been worn away from, I guess, people touching him or his owner touching him. And so basically his nose is not so much the shape of a nose anymore, but just tiny little holes, just like a pit, two little noses, kind of like a snake viper's nostrils, which is kind of creepy. The other thing about his face is that his eyes are little black beady eyes, and his face, as far as general, he has a smile, but it's a weird smile on his face. So he's kind of creepy in his little sailor suit. And as I said before, he's holding a dog, a stuffed dog. But the dog is not really a cutesy kind of stuffed animal dog. It is a kind of a weird dog. The dog has bulging eyes, and his tongue sticks out in kind of like a crazy lolling tongue. So it's just kind of a weird thing. But he has been, and he's an enchanted object, but he's been the source of, people saying that he caused divorce, he's caused car accident, he's caused people to break their bones, lose their jobs. All sorts of mishaps have been blamed on him, bad things that he does. But, and I'll put a picture up of him so you can see what he looks like. But let's talk a little bit about his history. Now, as I said, he's about 110 or 111 years old now. And he used to belong, first to a little boy named Robert Otto. And look at the name. The boy's name is Robert. The doll's name is Robert the doll. So, Robert, the real life Robert, little boy Robert, lived in Florida. And he was a member of a wealthy family, and they were very artistic people. So he himself, I think, was an artist. And apparently, he got the doll from his grandfather when he was 4 years old. It was a gift, a birthday gift. Now, we're not sure exactly where the grandfather got the doll, but we think that he got it from Germany when he was traveling there. He picked up the doll in Germany. No one really knows how the doll got enchanted per se. Some people say that it used to belong to a voodoo person, and they put a spell on it, and that's how it got enchanted, but we're not really sure. But we just know that it is. So Robert got the doll when he was 4, and here comes some loud talking people. Hopefully they'll pass by soon. So he got the doll when he was 4, and he kept it his entire childhood. So Robert became very attached to this doll. Let me try again in a few minutes. So Robert kept Robert the doll with him all of his childhood. And as it turns out, it is made by the same company that I think made the Teddy Roosevelt doll. And I think that's called the Stike Company. I might be pronouncing that wrong. But it was made by that company. But the thing about Robert the doll, he was never supposed to belong to any child, not ever. He actually was part of a display, like a store display of court jesters or joker dolls that was never supposed to be sold to anyone as a thing to love, a doll to love. So I don't know how his grandfather got a hold of that doll in Germany, but somehow he did and brought it home to Robert, who began to have an unnatural relationship with Robert the doll. He was never without that doll. And he began to talk to the doll like it was alive and in the first person. And he would refer to others like Robert was alive. So instead of just being like him as the only human in the room, it would be him, Robert, the real boy, and Robert, the doll, both alive in the room talking to other people. And he did this his whole life. And then something that happened when he was a child was that Robert, the little boy, began to blame things that happened on the doll. Weird things would happen at home, and he would say, I didn't do it. Robert, the doll, did it. And if something else happened unusual, he would say, I didn't do that, Mom or Dad. Robert, the doll, did it. So already something wasn't right with Robert, the doll, who was never supposed to be a doll in the first place. So this went on for a long time, and even the adults around him began to think that something was weird with Robert the doll. So he kept Robert with him all the time. So as he became an adult, he never outgrew that doll. As an adult, he still lived in a very nice home. He had his own home called the Artist House, and Robert the doll had a place on the second floor. He had a second floor window that he would put Robert the doll in, and Robert would look out all over the street where he could see everything. So if Robert, the real adult Robert, was working or wasn't at home, Robert the doll would be up in the second floor window watching over the house and over everything in the street. And little kids began to walk by the house and really think that Robert the doll was moving. Sometimes Robert would be there, they'd stop and watch the doll. He'd be there 1 second, and then the next second he'd be gone. And then a couple minutes later, he'd be back. And this is while the kids were just standing there the whole time. So Robert somehow had a life of his own, and he was moving. And so because of that, the house got a reputation that it was a haunted house because of Robert the doll. So then people started to avoid that house, even going in that street. Nobody wanted to go in that street where Robert the doll was looking out over the entire street from that second floor window. So Robert eventually passed away from old age. Robert died in 1974, and when he did, he put a clause in his will that whoever bought his house had to keep his doll, Robert the doll, in the attic, so the doll and the house could never be separated. His house was bought by a woman named Myrtle Reuter, and she had the doll in the attic most of the time, but sometimes she did take the doll down and display it at different places around her house. But when it was in the attic and she'd have people over, they would hear laughter and footsteps from the attic. They knew it was Robert the doll up there moving around. And sometimes when she'd have the doll downstairs, like in the living room, and they'd be talking about the doll, and if someone said something negative about Robert, the owner, the doll's facial expression would actually change. And he would look upset, like you can't talk about Robert, his owner, like that. He didn't like it. The other thing that Myrtle noticed was that the doll moved around the house by itself. She might have it sitting in a chair in the kitchen. 2 hours later, she might leave the area and then come back. The doll is gone from the kitchen, and it's in the living room sitting on the sofa. So Robert had a life of its own, and that's probably why it had to stay in that house. So with Myrtle, she moved it from the house to the attic, and the attic to the house, and back and forth for about 20 years. And finally, she had had enough. She had had enough of the doll's antics, and she gave it to the museum. So that is how Robert the doll got from the house to the museum. And in the museum, the museum has its own story because it used to be an old fort. And so Robert's spirit, I guess his enchanted spirit and whatever enchantment he has gotten along with the things at the fort. And so things are happening at the fort, and they do involve Robert in addition to the other things that are there. One of the people who works there, one of the employees, tried to take pictures of Robert one day without his hat on. He always has a little sailor hat on. And he got the feeling when he tried to take the hat off that the doll didn't like it. He says the eyes actually changed, and actually you could see life coming into the eyes because they don't want the hat off. So he took the pictures with the hat off and then put the hat right back on, and things calmed down. But he knew that the doll did not want to have the picture taken with his hat off. Other tourists who've come by the fort and taken other pictures of different items in the fort said that when they've gotten home or back at the hotel rooms and they looked at their pictures or their camera, every picture is of Robert. and they have never taken a picture of Robert. Every picture on the roll is filled with pictures of Robert. So how does that happen if that doll's not doing it? The other thing too is that since Robert was given up by Myrtle and given to the museum, Robert has become very famous. You know, I'm talking about Robert, but he has now become so famous. He has social media accounts. He has a page in Wikipedia. People actually write letters to him, but they aren't letters like from kids. Like a child letter to a doll. It's like adults who are writing letters of sorrow, like apologizing to Robert for things they might have done because they've had bad things happen in their lives, and somehow they came in contact with Robert and thought that he had something to do with them. And this is where people say that he's caused all sorts of misfortunes like broken bones and loss of jobs and other bad things that happen to people. So people write letters to him all the time, but they're letters of sorrow, letters of saying how sorry they are, letters of please take your curse off me. Some people even write letters saying, help me put a curse on somebody else, which is horrible in itself. And then sometimes little kids write to Robert the doll, and the owners of the museum or some of the staff there, they will respond back to a child when a child writes a letter. Because kids like writing to Santa Claus or dolls, they want to respond. So they write an appropriate letter for a child back to that child. But anyway, Robert has become very famous. If you look him up, you'll find him everywhere. If you Google his name, he will come right up as one of the enchanted dolls out there. I've always liked dolls, but always thought that they can be a little bit creepy. I'll never forget, this is quite a few years ago, one of my friends had a cookout at her home, and she had an old historical home. And in the home, she had a doll, and I think the doll dated back to, gosh, maybe the Civil War before. Nobody really knew. It was a very old-looking doll and a very strange-looking doll. Well, you know me, I like to take cameras and take pictures and videos. And I was with another friend of mine, and we were looking at the doll, and we thought, my gosh, what a strange-looking doll. And I said, you know what? Let me take a picture of this. And my friend immediately said, no, don't take a picture of that doll. You don't want that image on anything to leave this property or leave this room or this building. Don't take a picture. So I immediately got chill bumps when she said that I did not take a picture. And I'm glad I did not. Because who's to say what might have happened with that image of that doll? I might never have been able to get rid of it, or maybe it would attach itself to me. I don't know. Didn't want that to happen. But anyway, Robert the doll, he's been very interesting to find out all about him. And if you look online, there's probably some more about Robert the doll out there. But anyway, that was it for this week's Spooky Fridays. And I'll see you later, alligator. Bye!